You are not my wife anymore. I've met someone who understands me better.
Okay.
Open up! I'm telling you, this is my property. You're making a mistake.
William, stop this! Let's just go!
This is a travesty. I own this. Look at the title.
He stood at the gate of a mansion worth $10 million, pressing his thumb against the biometric scanner over and over again. Nothing. The gates didn't open. And behind him, his new girlfriend, 3 wealthy investors, and a celebrity realtor, all watched in silence as the man who had just told the world this was his home couldn't get inside. The outdoor display screen on the estate's front wall flickered on automatically. Architectural blueprints, legal ownership documents, financial records going back 14 years. Every single document had one name on it: Susan Monroe Brooks. Not his, hers. And Susan? She wasn't even there. She didn't need to be. Because what William Brooks did to Susan Monroe was not just a betrayal. It was a slow, calculated erasure of a woman who had quietly built everything he was standing on. And when she was done, she didn't just walk away. She locked the door. Susan Monroe was not the kind of woman people noticed right away. She wasn't loud. She didn't walk into rooms demanding attention. She didn't post about her achievements or make people feel small so she could feel tall. She was the kind of woman who sat in the corner of a room full of powerful people, listening carefully, saying very little, and understanding everything. She grew up in a modest home in Columbus, Ohio. Her mother cleaned houses for a living. Her father drove delivery trucks until his back gave out. They were not poor in spirit, but they were careful with money in the way that people are when they know what it feels like to have nothing. Susan was the first person in her family to go to college, and not just any program. She studied architecture at one of the most competitive design schools in the country. She worked 2 jobs to stay enrolled. She ate cheap food and wore the same 4 outfits on rotation for 2 years. She stayed up past midnight drawing floor plans by hand because her laptop broke and she couldn't afford to fix it immediately. But she graduated, near the top of her class. And then she worked, quietly and relentlessly. By the time she was 31 years old, Susan Monroe had designed 3 award-winning residential properties in Atlanta. She had consulted on 2 luxury hotel lobbies. She had a reputation, a quiet, serious reputation, among the kind of clients who didn't care about flash, but cared deeply about precision and vision. She was not famous. She didn't want to be. She saved every dollar she earned with the discipline of someone who had watched her parents struggle and promised herself it would never happen to her. And then, when she was 32, she found the land. 22 acres on the edge of the city. Elevated. Private. With a view that made your chest ache the first time you saw it. She bought it herself. She designed the house herself. She oversaw the construction herself. Every material, every measurement, every detail. It took 3 years. When it was finished, the estate was appraised at just over $10 million. Susan walked through the front door on the day it was completed, sat down on the floor of the empty main hall, and cried quietly for about 10 minutes. Not from sadness, from the weight of knowing she had done something real, something permanent, something nobody could take from her. She was wrong about that last part. Or at least, she almost was. She met William at a real estate conference in Atlanta when she was 34. He was tall, well-dressed, with a laugh that filled a room and a handshake that made people feel like they'd known him for years. He was in real estate development, ambitious, connected, working his way up the social ladder with deliberate, impressive speed. He saw Susan standing near the window during a break, looking out at the skyline, and he walked straight over to her. "You look like the most interesting person in this room," he said. She looked at him for a moment without smiling. "That's not a high bar," she replied. He laughed, genuinely this time. They talked for the rest of the break, and then the rest of the evening. He was charming. He was curious about her work. He asked real questions and listened to the answers. He didn't talk over her or redirect conversations back to himself the way many men in his industry did. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Susan was careful. She had been careful her whole life. But William was persistent in a way that felt warm rather than pushy, and slowly. Over months of dinners and phone calls and long conversations that stretched past midnight, she let him in. They dated for 2 years. He asked her to marry him at the estate. She had brought him there for the first time 6 months into their relationship. He walked through every room with his mouth slightly open, asking question after question. He was visibly moved. He told her it was the most beautiful home he had ever seen. When he got down on one knee in the garden of the property she had built with her own hands and her own money, she said yes. They got married. And that was the beginning of the end, though Susan wouldn't understand that for years. It didn't happen overnight. That's the thing about this kind of story. The cruelty isn't sudden. It's gradual. It builds so slowly that the person experiencing it starts to doubt their own perception. In the first year of marriage, William suggested they merge their public image. He had a growing profile in the Atlanta development community, and he thought it made more sense for them to operate as a unified brand. Susan didn't see anything wrong with that. When his business contacts came to the estate for dinners, William hosted. He spoke about the property with a familiarity and pride that slowly began to sound like ownership. "This place is everything to me," he'd say. Susan would smile quietly from across the table. When a prominent architecture magazine reached out about a feature on the estate, William encouraged her to let the property speak for itself rather than doing an interview. He said the attention could complicate her existing clients. Susan thought he was looking out for her. He was not. When a journalist asked William at a charity gala about his remarkable home, he smiled and said, "I put a lot of myself into that place." He did not correct the assumption. Susan heard it from across the room. She walked over. She smiled. She said nothing. "Because what do you say? In front of everyone? To your husband?" She filed it away. She kept filing things away. When William's business began to grow, and it did grow, partly because of the elite clientele that Susan had quietly introduced him to, the architects, the developers, the investors who trusted Susan's judgment and by extension began trusting William, he started spending more time with those connections. Without her, he'd come home and mention meetings she hadn't known about, lunches with people she'd introduced him to, deals being discussed in rooms she wasn't invited into. And then slowly, those people started treating William as the primary contact. They stopped calling Susan. They stopped emailing her. They asked William to pass along their regards. She went from being the architect who designed a landmark estate to being William Brooks' wife in the span of about 3 years. And the worst part, the part that makes your stomach turn, is that she still hadn't fully seen it. Because William was still good to her at home, most of the time. He still said he loved her. He still came to her with decisions and listened to her answers. He just stopped crediting her for any of it. Year 4 of the marriage was when things shifted. William's confidence had grown into something that no longer needed Susan's steadiness to balance it. He had built his own social footing now, mostly on the foundation she had laid. And somewhere in that process, he had started to believe his own version of the story. He began dismissing her opinions in front of others. Small things at first. "That's not how business works, sweetheart," said with a smile that made the people around the table chuckle uncomfortably. Then bigger things. He brought in a business partner, a woman named Cassandra Reed, a celebrity realtor with a massive social following and a personality that took up every square inch of a room. She was strategic, polished, and she understood William's ambition in a way that seemed to excite him deeply. Susan noticed. She didn't say anything right away. She watched. Cassandra began appearing at the estate more frequently. For meetings, William said. For planning sessions. Susan would come home and find Cassandra's car in the driveway. She'd walk in and find them at the kitchen table, The kitchen of the home Susan had designed down to the tile grout, laptops open, phones out, talking in the urgent tone of people building something exciting together. They always looked slightly startled to see her. That look told Susan everything she needed to know. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She thought. It was a Tuesday evening in October. Susan came home from a site consultation. She had recently returned to private consulting work, quietly rebuilding the professional presence she had allowed to fade. And she walked into the living room to find William standing there with his arms crossed. Cassandra was not there, but her presence was. William had clearly made a decision, and he had made it some time ago. The conversation that followed had the energy of someone reading a prepared statement rather than having a real discussion. He said their marriage wasn't working. He said they had grown in different directions. He said he needed space to pursue his vision, which was interesting, Susan thought, because she had never heard him articulate a specific vision that didn't originate from a conversation they'd had together. And then he said it, looking at her with the calm certainty of a man who had already calculated every outcome and concluded he would be fine. "You're not my wife anymore, Susan." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Okay." That was all. He seemed almost disappointed by how calm she was. He had probably expected tears or anger or desperation. He had probably rehearsed responses to those reactions. He got none of them. Because Susan Monroe had spent 34 years learning how to survive things quietly. And in that moment, sitting inside a house that was hers in every legal, financial, and moral sense, she understood exactly what was about to happen. And she decided, quietly and completely, what she was going to do about it. Here is what William Brooks had never bothered to find out. The estate, the $10 million property he had lived in for 4 years, entertained in, referenced in business conversations, allowed people to assume was his, was never jointly owned. Not 1 square foot of it. Susan had purchased the land and financed the construction entirely before they were married, under her sole name. Through a private LLC she had established called Monroe Design Holdings. She had never transferred the title. She had never added his name to the deed. She had never had any legal reason to, and William had never thought to ask, because he had assumed, with the arrogance of a man who was used to things working in his favor, that marriage meant half. He did not know about the LLC. He did not know about the 14 years of financial documentation. He did not know about the architectural firm certificates, the permits, the contractor agreements, the inspection records, all of which bore Susan's name, Susan's signature, Susan's professional seal. He did not know that the estate's security system, the biometric gates, the facial recognition access points, the outdoor display system that could be remotely activated from Susan's phone, had been programmed with exactly one primary user, her. And he did not know that 3 days after he told her she was no longer his wife, Susan had met with one of Atlanta's most formidable estate attorneys and quietly, methodically begun the process of making sure the legal reality of ownership was not just accurate, but airtight, documented, and ready. She still came home every evening. She still cooked dinner twice that week. She was calm. She was pleasant. She gave nothing away. William thought he had already won. If you are still watching at this point, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell us. Do you think William had any idea what was coming? And tell us where in the world you are watching this story from. We read every single comment, and we love hearing from you. Now, back to Susan. Because what happens next is the part of this story that people are going to be talking about. Susan requested a 3-week window before the formal separation process began, citing the need to collect personal documents and arrange alternative accommodation. William agreed immediately. He was generous about it. He even suggested she could take whatever furniture she wanted from certain rooms. He genuinely believed he was being gracious about taking her home from her. During those 3 weeks, Susan did 4 things. First, she met with her attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had spent 22 years in property and estate law and had seen variations of this situation more times than she cared to count. Patricia reviewed every document Susan brought to that first meeting, then looked up from the folder and said, very calmly, "He has no claim. None." Second, she contacted the estate's security technology firm and had the system fully updated. New biometric data. Williams was quietly removed from primary access. Guest access, which had always been the status his profile operated under, though he'd never known it, was revoked entirely. A secondary display system was also installed on the outer gate wall, capable of showing documents on the large outdoor screen when activated remotely. Third, she reached out to 3 of Atlanta's most respected architects and interior designers, people who had known her professionally long before William was part of her life, and she began having conversations about something she had been thinking about for a while: a foundation for young women in architecture and design. She had the space. She had the resources. She had the name. Fourth, she said nothing to William about any of it. Every evening she was polite, sometimes warm. She asked how his meetings went. She listened when he talked about the projects he and Cassandra were developing. He mistook her composure for defeat. He began making plans. He told Cassandra about the property. He described it as the crown jewel of what he was building. He suggested they use the estate for a high-profile investor showcase event, the kind of gathering that would cement his position as one of Atlanta's premier development figures. He set a date. He sent invitations. He did not mention any of this to Susan. He thought the house was already his. It was a Saturday morning in November. The Atlanta air was cool and clear. The estate looked the way it always did: composed, extraordinary, quietly commanding. 3 luxury vehicles pulled up to the gate just after 11 in the morning. William stepped out of the first one, dressed in a dark suit, relaxed and confident. Cassandra was beside him in a tailored ivory coat, phone out, already framing shots of the exterior for what Susan later learned was going to be a social media reveal tied to their new development brand. Behind them, 4 investors and their associates stepped out onto the gravel, looking up at the property with the expression that the estate always produced in people who saw it for the first time. William walked to the biometric entry panel at the main gate. He pressed his thumb against the scanner. The system gave a soft, neutral beep. Access not recognized. He tried again. Same result. He tried the facial recognition panel. User not found. He pulled out his phone. He had an access code he sometimes used for guests, and entered it. Code no longer valid. The silence that fell over the group was slow and total. Cassandra looked at him. The investors looked at him. Nobody said anything. William's neck flushed. He laughed, the short, tight laugh of a man recalibrating rapidly. "Must be a system glitch," he said. "I'll call the security company." He called. He was on hold. And that was when the outdoor display screen, the large, elegant panel mounted on the stone wall beside the gate, flickered on. It didn't make a sound. It simply showed documents. The first was a land purchase agreement, dated 14 years ago. Susan Monroe, sole buyer. The second was the architectural firm license for Monroe Design Holdings. The third was the full construction permit file, with Susan's professional seal on every page. The fourth was the property title. Owner, Susan Monroe Brooks. Sole title holder. No secondary claimants. The documents scrolled slowly, clearly, in crisp, high resolution. Every person standing in that driveway could read them. William stood completely still for a moment. Then he turned to Cassandra. Cassandra was looking at the screen with an expression that Susan's attorney later described, when she heard the account, as a woman realizing she has walked into something she did not fully investigate. One of the investors, a man named Gerald Howarth, who had been in commercial real estate for 30 years and who knew exactly what a property title document looked like, took a long look at the screen, then looked at William. He said nothing. He walked back to his car. The others followed. No explanation was asked for. None was given. Cassandra left without speaking to William. William stood at the gate of a house worth $10 million that he could not enter, in a driveway that was emptying around him, in front of a display screen that was broadcasting the truth to no one who remained. He called Susan. She didn't answer. She was in her attorney's office, finalizing the last of the paperwork. The news moved the way news always does in tight professional circles. By that evening, Gerald Howarth had made 2 phone calls. By the following Monday, 3 of the other investors had pulled out of conversations with Williams' development company entirely. Nobody issued a public statement. Nobody needed to. In the world William operated in, a story like this, standing at a locked gate, unable to get into a property you had claimed as your own, in front of witnesses, didn't need to be announced. It simply traveled. 2 of the publications that had been developing profiles on Williams' rising career quietly shelved the pieces. A business partnership that had been close to signing with William and Cassandra's new venture dissolved after one of the partners did a simple title search on the estate and made a very short phone call. Cassandra distanced herself publicly. She posted a vague statement about realigning her professional direction and did not mention William by name. But everyone who knew the situation understood what it meant. William tried to fight it. He hired an attorney, an aggressive one, who looked at the ownership documents for approximately 40 minutes before advising William that there was no legal basis for any claim to the property and that pursuing the matter would be costly, public, and unsuccessful. He did not pursue it. He moved into a rental apartment on the other side of the city. He kept his remaining clients and kept working, but at a significantly reduced scale, because so much of what he had been building had been built on the credibility of connections that had come through Susan and on the social weight of an estate that was not his. Without those things, William Brooks was talented, ambitious, and mid-level, which is exactly what he had been before he met her. The foundation launched 4 months later. Susan stood in the main hall of the estate. Her estate, the one she had cried on the floor of the day it was completed, and she looked out at 43 young women who had been selected for the inaugural cohort of the Monroe Design Foundation. Architecture students, interior design graduates, women in construction management, young women from backgrounds like hers, where the talent had always been there, but the resources and the rooms had been harder to access. She had converted the West Wing into studio space. The library had been stocked with professional references and design archives. There was a mentorship program with 12 senior architects who had signed on as advisors. Susan stood at the front of the room, and she said something that people who were there remembered for a long time afterward. She said, "I built this house before I knew what it would become. I didn't know it would become this. But I think that's how the best things work. You build something true, and then you find out what it was for." She didn't mention William. She didn't need to. The symbolic object that carried the weight of everything that had happened was a small framed blueprint, the original hand-drawn floor plan of the estate, done in pencil on grid paper, signed at the bottom corner in Susan's careful architectural handwriting. It hung in the entrance of the foundation's main hall, the first thing anyone saw when they walked in. It was slightly faded now, a little worn at the edges. She had kept it through everything. There is something that happens to people when they quietly build a life of their own and then allow someone else to stand in front of it. They start to become invisible even to themselves. Susan Monroe had been doing that for years, stepping back, staying quiet, not correcting the record, choosing peace over precision. And for a long time, she told herself that was grace. It was partially true, but it was also fear. Fear of being called difficult, fear of making a marriage uncomfortable, fear of being that woman, The one who had to explain that yes, actually, this was hers. What changed on that Tuesday in October, when William stood in her living room and told her she was no longer his wife, was not that she suddenly became powerful. She had always been powerful. What changed was that she stopped pretending otherwise. She stopped making herself smaller than the house she had built. She stopped giving credit to a story that wasn't true. And in doing that, in simply insisting on the truth with no drama, no public performance, no revenge plot, she became completely untouchable. Because the truth, when it is fully documented and patiently held, does not need to be argued. It simply needs to be shown. Susan's story is not really about a mansion. It is about what happens when you spend years shrinking yourself to fit into a version of your life that someone else is narrating, and then one day you stop. It is about the quiet devastation of watching people take credit for what you built, while you stand in the back of the room, smiling politely. It is about the moment you realize that you do not need to explain yourself to people who were never paying attention in the first place. And it is about what becomes possible when you stop waiting for someone to recognize your value and simply start acting from it. The gate did not open for William Brooks, not because Susan was cruel, but because the system had always known who built it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is simply make sure the record is accurate, and then let people find out on their own time. And that, my friends, is the story of Susan Monroe Brooks. I want to know what you think. Drop a comment right now. What was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Was it the gate that wouldn't open? Was it William standing in front of those documents? Or was it Susan sitting on the floor of that empty house after she built it? Tell me in the comments. And if you are watching this story and you see any part of yourself in Susan, the quiet work, the being overlooked, the slowly disappearing, this channel is for you. Subscribe to Morel Folktales. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. We release new stories every week. And every story we tell is about one thing: the people who were underestimated and what they did next. I'll see you in the next one.